schools that are in New York, but all over the country, kids are like in the other schools, brought to a very high standard of excellence. When kids rate themselves on items like I just read you, their mental frame is different from kids who could be just down the block at a different school that doesn't have those standards. So that distorts the scores to some extent. As a researcher, I know about that. I know how to adjust for that when I run statistics and so forth. I also know that there's error. I know that there's the possibility of faking. What I worry about is employers or schools or government agencies who make the mistake of thinking that you can take a grit scale score and make those high stakes decisions that the grit scale is never designed for. Like, don't hire with the grit scale.
No, I'm not proposing.
Yeah, okay,
I'm not proposing that we.
Didn't want that to be the headline. Didn't think it was going to be.
But I do wonder. I mean, it seems to me like we've perfected a lot of ways of measuring a bunch of talent.
Do you want me to tell you my best ideas?
Yeah, well,
haven't been
please,
tested yet?
Yes.
Okay, so I have one idea that has been tested. When you look at the resumes of people who want to be Googlers, which I can also tell you, I think that's interesting that you use that term Googlers, and I think I know why you do. But that's me for another question.
I would love to know why we do.
I'm going to tell you. I think it's actually I think it's not trivial, so I'll tell you. But when you look at the resume of somebody who wants to get in here, what I would look for is evidence of grit. I'm not saying that it has to be in exactly this domain or even for the job that person. Ideally, yes, but sometimes it can be like, wow, this kid was on the tennis team for 3 or 4 years in college and went from A to B in their accomplishments. Like, whew, this kid worked, I'll tell you about my own husband. Like, this kid worked for Domino's Pizza as a delivery, but like they got promoted, right? Like they kept, there's progression and there's continuity in a high grit resume. Conversely, don't hire the people who have these sort of like dilettante resumes of sort of like, oh, a little bit here, a little bit there. Where is the evidence of passion and perseverance applied to something before they got to my doorstep? So I think you can look for the residue of grit, as it were, like in people's resumes. What I don't think you should do is use the grit scale. And also, I don't think you can rely on interviews. I am of the opinion that you can interview for charisma, you can interview for social intelligence, you can interview for confidence. You can interview even for chemistry. Like, am I going to like to sit next to this person and work with them? But how are you going to interview for that quality of a person where the next day they're going to get up and they're going to be the first into the office or the last? When you give them the feedback that says this isn't good enough, is that person going to genuinely reflect on that and try to improve? That's really hard to get out of any kind of short interaction. And my best idea, which hasn't been tested, right, is if there is something that people are going to have to do at Google, and it's particularly obvious to their job, right, that is really hard, where you can set up a kind of mini grit experiment, right, where you're going to let them perform, right, and learn, get feedback, see whether they take that feedback, see whether they come back for a second try, get more see whether they come back for a third try. I think that would be fascinating.
So assessment as opposed to interview, right?
Exactly. But, it's like you're piloting the person, right? I mean, giving them a chance to display their grit as opposed to trying to guess at it. Do you want me to tell you why I think you use the word Google?
Well, yeah, I would love to know.
Yeah. So my dad worked for DuPont his whole life, right? It was, he actually retired with a gold watch. I thought that was just like a metaphor, or he got one and it said DuPont, better things for better living on it. Spent his entire adult life there in automotive refinishing products, which was his passion, by the way. And my dad did not talk about, working at DuPont. He talked about being a DuPonter.
Really?
Yeah. And, people who go to West Point, graduate, from West Point, so they call themselves West Pointers, right? Kids who go to KIPP, they're not students, they're KIPsters. At the Seattle Seahawks, you're not just a football player, you're a Seahawk, right? These are nouns, they're not adjectives. And when people have an extremely strong cultural identity, they're usually able to express that as a noun. I'm a Googler. I'm not working for any other company. There's a way that we do things here. There's a language that we use here. You probably don't use it where you are because you're not a Googler. So,
we also have an adjective, googly.
Oh, what does that mean? Just in the spirit of Googleness?
I've been spending 8 years trying to figure out what it means personally. But
I think you should stick with Googler. Googly sounds like those little eyeballs that go.
Yeah.
Look,
Ryan on stage once made that comment. Ooh, he's
right?
so
googly. Yeah, I don't think that's the look. Let the marketing department decide, but I think that's what you're going for. Yeah.